Welcome everyone to 123 Yes Wrestling, and this is special coverage of Impact Wrestling's Bash at the Brewery. I hope everyone is enjoying their 4th of July holiday here in the States. And I just wanted to close out everyone's holiday weekend as they're recovering and recuperating, as I try to merge those words together with special coverage of Impact Wrestling's Bash at the Brewery. I had the privilege or pleasure to be able to go to this event. Ended up sitting front row. I was on TV quite a few times with my 123 Yes Wrestling t-shirt, and I recorded something a little special for you guys, just recapping the show for those of you who don't have access to Impact Plus. So I'm going to play that coverage now. Hope you guys had a nice, safe holiday, and we will be back next week with the only episode 35 of 123 Yes Wrestling there will ever be. So we actually had a Impact Bash at the Brewery to start off the big Slammiversary weekend was here in town, and I was able to actually get tickets. So I wanted to kind of take advantage of going to this show and wanted to talk about Impact Wrestling a little bit more. And I wanted to just go over the results from Bash at the Brewery as we head into Slammiversary. For those of you who don't have Impact Plus, weren't able to watch it, just kind of wanted to see as there were some changes that happened on this show that directly impact Slammiversary. So the setting for this event, before I really get into it, was the Freetail Brewery downtown. It was an interesting kind of setting. I didn't know how a brewery was going to set up a wrestling event. And then as I walked in, they had the line for the tickets, which kind of takes you through the tasting room where they have the bar set up and everything. As you get through, you're kind of in line. And then as you go through these doors, you could see all the big barrels for beer brewing and all that stuff. They had this lady handing us basically the card hot glued to a popsicle stick. So they were giving us basically makeshift fans. And as you got closer, it got hotter and hotter. And you realized as you kind of went out, got your ticket scanned, they were selling koozies and little like Impact Plus things. They had right to the right of us were all of the wrestlers doing their meet and greets. So they just had a couple tables with a couple people. I saw Tessa Blanchard standing there. Josh Matthews walked right past me as I was coming in the door. He was like, "Excuse me," and he walked through, so that was interesting. I know I saw Michael Elgin and Tessa Blanchard kind of standing at tables doing meet and greets, but it was so hectic there just due to the volume of people trying to get through this door to get to their seats. But then as you walk in, it's just you're in a warehouse. They had fans on, and outside of that, there was no AC. So being in Texas, it was hot. So you had your fans, and you just kind of stayed cool as best as you could. So as the show progressed, it got a little bit cooler. But I mean, those poor wrestlers, man, they were sweating, and a lot of them were sweating before they even came out, because I don't know where they were hanging out before, if there was any AC. There was AC in like the bar area, so if they were back there hanging out before the show, if they were in the back offices area waiting for their time, but the backstage area was still in the warehouse. They just had the screen up with the curtains. I don't know how they were tied up with that or where they were, but they were hot and they were huffing and puffing, because that Texas heat can kill you. So after they had some RCW, which is our local indie federation here, they did some local dark matches, which were a nice way to get started. The actual show, Bash at the Brewery, started with a 6-man tag team match. It was the Rascals, and they defeated Matthew Palmer, Dirty Andy Dalton, and Steve Areno. And they started the show, the Rascals, high-flying. I mean, it was a high-flying affair, and they started really, really quick, which was interesting because during the first couple matches, the ropes we noticed were really loose. And by the time they finished the second match, which actually had one of the RCW guys finishing with a 420, or was it a 420? Or I think it was a 640 splash. I mean, it was an insane, was not expecting that, but the ropes were bouncing around like crazy. And by the time we were in the middle of the Rascals match and watching them do all their flipping and flopping, they would have broke a rope or killed themselves, because they do a lot of high-flying stuff, and those ropes needed to be a lot tighter. So we were glad that there was even a safety first chant that started as they were tightening up the ropes, just due to the fact that they were really loose. But they put on a good match. The Rascals won, and they're actually going into Slammiversary against LAX, which are the Impact Tag Team Champs. So they're going into Slammiversary, so they needed the big win, which is what they got. Then Brian Cage, the Impact Heavyweight Champ, came out. He cut a promo just talking about Brian Elgin and Moose, who he was scheduled to fight at this event, was Moose and Brian Cage. Brian Cage was cutting a promo, and then Moose came out, and we were surprised that we were going to get that match already. We figured that would have been an end of the night, but then Michael Elgin showed up, and he attacked Brian Cage. and he ended up taking a chair, and he ended up beating up Brian Cage, and then they left. They then moved on to the RCW Heavyweight Championship match, which was Fallah Bahh, who was the champion, and he defeated adorable Anthony Andrews. They were two pretty big guys. If anyone's seen Fallah Bahh before, he's a big boy, and they did some pretty big moves, and they were doing some big slams and throwing themselves around like they were cruiserweights, and they put on a good match. But Fallah Bahh is very just gimmicky, so he did his shtick. The crowd went nuts because he's a big normal RCW. As I said, he's the heavyweight champ here in town, so he did all of his things. Big following behind him. He's entertaining. He does a whole big thing where he always goes, "Oh, no, no, no." And he kept doing that as he hulked up during the match. They put on a good match, and Fallah Bahh is still the RCW heavyweight champ. After this, they went and cut a promo backstage, which we couldn't really hear out in the arena or in the brewery in the main area. And they cut this promo backstage where Moose was yelling at Brian Elgin and all this stuff, and then they left. So we didn't really know what was going on at that point. We found out later in the night exactly what they were talking about. Then we had Jordynne Grace coming out to take on Jessica Havoc, which she's part of the big Monsters Ball match at Slammiversary with Rosemary. So they came out and they had their one-on-one match, and those were two big, strong women, and they were doing some big moves as well. They were taking some hits. They were doing some flippity-flops. Jessica Havoc was throwing her muscle. Jordynne Grace was definitely throwing her muscle around and really hitting hard. The end came with a Su Yung, who was down there with Jessica Havoc. She attacked Jordynne Grace outside the ring, caused a disqualification. The two of them, Havoc and Su Yung, attacked Jordynne Grace, and then Rosemary came out, defended Jordynne Grace, and it turned into, you can guess it, playa, a tag team match. So match was restarted as Jordynne Grace and Rosemary then went on to defeat Jessica Havoc and Su Yung, with Su Yung taking the pin to make everyone still look strong who has big matches at Slammiversary. It was a good match. It was a hard-hitting women's match, which was good to see, and being the only real women's match on the card outside of Tessa Blanchard, but she was in there with all the guys as she's been doing lately. It was a good showing for the women, doing some hard hitting, doing Jordynne Grace at the end of that match. She did this suicide dive out to the ring, like almost over Jessica Havoc, and she threw her body, and it looked brutal, and it needed to be the end of the match because we didn't know if she was coming back from that one. So it was definitely, it was a fast-paced match, and with some big, strong girls, they were able to really show what they got and make it grab our attention, which was really cool to do. Then we had Tessa Blanchard, Rich Swann, and Willie Mack. They came out to fight OVE, which is Jake Christ, and Madman Fulton. So it was OVE versus Tessa Blanchard, Rich Swann, and Willie Mack. Tessa Blanchard, Rich Swann, and Willie Mack picked up the win. Tessa Blanchard was crazy over with this crowd. She's probably got the biggest pop of the night. Everybody was behind her, had some interesting chants. They were, really, they had a good time. They had a good match. Willie Mack did some moves for being a big guy like he is. He did this suicide flip over the top rope, and his leg, and it must have been just the top of his foot, otherwise he would have died. But he crashed into the railing, and I thought, man, it seemed like you could just feel his Achilles tendon tear. But he was able to get up again. He even delivered a standing moonsault onto one of the OVE guys. It was a good match. Rich Swann, hard hitting. They were doing their slaps and their knees to faces and kicks to faces over and over again. No selling stuff. They just went. Tessa Blanchard was given some big code breakers off top ropes with some big guys falling on her, and she just kept popping up and just kept doing her thing. She wanted the biggest guy. She wanted Madman Fulton. She wanted to do damage. They put on a hell of a match. It was, once again, having 6 people. It was fast and furious, and based on the setting that we were in, being in that brewery in the warehouse setting, sometimes it just had that like low quality where you're just expecting kind of just whatever, and you kept forgetting that this thing was televised. So they were giving it their all and doing some big moves on this show, so it made for a really good time on there, and it was awesome to see Tessa Blanchard there, and just like I said, all the big names, but being able to see her really do her thing and in there with the guys was definitely something worth seeing. Next up was what that promo with Michael Elgin and Moose ended up being, but earlier in the night, scheduled was Eddie Edwards and Michael Elgin were supposed to have a one-on-one match, as was Moose and Brian Cage. Due to that attack by Michael Elgin, Brian Cage was taken out. I'm assuming it's to protect him because I know he's had some injuries since he won that title against Johnny Impact at their last pay-per-view in, I think, January, Homecoming. So he hasn't really been wrestling any matches, and they want to save their main event for Slammiversary, so it was a way to get him out of the match. So it ended up turning into a triple threat with Michael Elgin, Eddie Edwards, and Moose. And once again, these three big guys, crowd was really into it. Everyone's going nuts for Moose, and Michael Elgin just was a beast, and Eddie Edwards was super over with his being the only real face in the match. So they just put on another hard-hitting, high-flying. This one was a little bit more ground and pound, but even they were doing stuff off the top ropes and had a good triple threat match feel. Like I said, overall, this is a really good show. If you have, it's a little bit higher quality than a house show, especially because it was televised. So that definitely does come into play. That they really gave it a little bit more of their all, but it was definitely worth checking out. It was probably more fun being there than it would be watching, because I've already went back and tried to watch it and check some out, and their live events, these specials that they do on the Impact Plus app, the sound, it just isn't really there. They focus all of their sound in the backstage where they have Josh Matthews and Don Callis doing their commentary and the ring announcers. None of them were out on the actual floor. So they kind of pay attention to where they put the sound, so everything's focused on what they're saying, so you can hear the crowd, but it's real quiet. I noticed that when I watched United We Stand over WrestleMania weekend, was that you just couldn't hear the crowd, so it's really easy to not be into the matches because you just can't hear the crowd, you can't really get pulled in. But they put on some really good matches on this show. But Michael Elgin defeated Eddie Edwards and Moose, of course. You got to save your Slammiversary main event, so Michael Elgin's not taking the L here. But hard-hitting match, once again proving why Michael Elgin is one of the top guys in Impact and is ready for that main event of Slammiversary this Sunday. Then we had the Impact Tag Team Championships match, the North up against LAX, which are were the reigning Impact champions, but the North beat them. Which changed the whole Slammiversary card because now the North got added to the match with LAX and the Rascals. So now it's a triple threat at Slammiversary with the North, LAX, and Rascals for the Impact Tag Team Champs. The North put on a good show. They were really good with the crowd. They were telling kids that they suck and yelling at people. So they put on just a really good, entertaining show, I thought. They had LAX was super over with the crowd here in San Antonio. So they really bonded. The crowd, like I said, was hot for all these. Unfortunately, you can't hear a lot of that on the app. But the North, I've never seen them wrestle before. So I think it seems like they've been a mainstay and a big main event team for their Impact Weekly show lately. So I think that they were deserving of these belts. And they seemed like they were excited and cut some cool promos afterwards. But yeah, it was nice to see a title change on this. It was the only real title that was offered, and it changed hands, so that was really cool, and be excited to see what they do with throw the Rascals in there at Slammiversary on a bigger stage, and that probably could have the possibility to steal the show this Sunday at Slammiversary. Then in the main event, Rob Van Dam defeated Sami Callihan, which was probably honestly the weakest card. RVD can still move and do his thing. Sami Callihan, he's just got his shtick, and he's a little bit more, seems like a hardcore guy. And when you put him in a match where he can't use some of that stuff and he actually has to fight and brawl a little bit, they're just a really weird mixture. Rob Van Dam's a little bit more high-flying, and he's a little bit more smoother, and Sami Callihan's kind of that bruiser, that brawler. So you put them together, and unless they're really going to work, and Rob Van Dam, unfortunately, he moves. You can't take away how well he moves and what he does. He still moves way better than I do, after all the years of punishment on his body. But it's still just one of those things where they just were off that little bit throughout the night, so it made for a little bit. And then they did a little bit more brawling outside of the ring, which doesn't work that well when you're live because the guardrails are so high. So it's like you're trying to see, but you lose it and you don't have a screen. So they put on, it was a good main event. The crowd was behind RVD. Sami Callihan did his thing. They threw themselves into the rail, which also threw us off because they threw Sami Callihan threw RVD into the railing right by us, and then Sami Callihan ran around the ring and went and jumped into him. So everyone in my section jumped up to grab the railing from slamming into this mom and all her kids right there in the front row. And then a cop showed up to check the railing out and do all this stuff. So it kind of almost pulled us out of the match because there was all that commotion going on right in front of us. It was a solid match, probably the weakest, but RVD got the win as expected. And then Tessa Blanchard did come out because she's fighting Sami Callihan at Slammiversary. So they helped build that feud. She made sure, as Sami Callihan had some of his OVE brethren come out to help him try to sneak the win, Tessa Blanchard came out, even the odds, place went nuts, made sure Sami Callihan took the L, and everybody went home happy with RVD doing his shtick all the way out. So, I mean, overall, it was a good live event. It was a good little televised. Because it made it a better event. They went out a lot more than they would have if it wouldn't have been televised. So if you have Impact Plus, it's definitely worth checking out. It's easy to put on. Like I said, the sound quality for these Impact Plus specials aren't the strongest. It is kind of weak audio when it comes to those things, but there's some decent, solid wrestling in there to be had. It builds up for Slammiversary here on Sunday, which is tonight here in a few hours, if anyone's planning on watching that. Impact Plus 30-day free trial. I think I haven't figured out how to do it yet, but if you purchase Slammiversary through the Impact Plus app, you get 3 months of Impact Plus for free. 30-day free trial, $8 a month. Outside of that, you're looking for an alternative or something different to watch, or just more wrestling or a different kind of wrestling. If you're burnt out of WWE, it's definitely worth checking out as we wait for AEW to get weekly. And that was 123 Yes Wrestling's coverage of Impact Wrestling's Bash at the Brewery. I had a good time. I always love going to see wrestling live. Looking forward to more events coming to town, and especially, hopefully, some New Japan, some Ring of Honor, all of the bigger federations would be cool, especially when the AEW starts touring. I'm sure we'll all want to catch that. Until next time, this is 123 Yes Wrestling signing off. We'll be back next Friday with the only episode 35 there will ever be. Hope everyone in the States had a great holiday. Hope everyone else around the world listening had a great weekend. And it's always a pleasure, and we will see you next time. Take it easy, guys.